Several months ago, Ron wrote to me and said, we'd like you to do a presentation here today and at the meeting yesterday, and would like me to update my data. And I said, I don't know if you know what you're getting in for. This is a huge data file. I started it with Ann Tweddle, who's my partner in this. She's someone with a long career with the federal government, starting with National Health and Welfare. And I can tell you that this is an Excel file that's grown to absolutely huge proportions. And all of you lucky people are going to get a copy of it if you wish it. It's going to be put on the website. And I am hoping that a lot of people will put on their miner's cap and start getting in there and mining this data. I'm just going to tell you a few of the things that I've done with this data over the last while. But the good news is it is up to date to 2013. The bad news is that the Excel file is so large that it hiccups every so often, but we've managed to make it behave in the last week or so. So I want to talk about the 9 disability income systems in Canada, and I call them systems because they're not just programs. And I think we could have an honorable mention of a 10th too, and we could probably put in auto insurance and pain and suffering awards as a 10th income system, and I'll get onto that right after this, right after the meetings this week. But these 9 disability income systems are listed: CPPD, EI sickness, veterans programs that are larger than you think and are about to get larger, hundreds, if not thousands, of private plans. The next is workers' compensation. The folks at Plan Canada said that I should start to include the RDSP because it's come to the point where it's about $1 billion program, so I've started to include that. Mainly non-refundable disability tax credits, and non-refundable means that you only get the value of these credits if you do pay tax, and it's only money that's taken off tax. Refundable credits, as you know, are credits that you get regardless whether you pay tax. Social or income assistance, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably: income assistance, social assistance, public assistance, but we know them to be programs that have their origins in our social assistance or welfare systems. And finally, the portion of the working income tax benefit that relates to people with disabilities. There's a slightly different design for it, and it's also a very small program. So one of the themes that I had been exploring was the fact that social assistance programs across Canada seem to be gaining market share, if we use the language of business commentators. And you can see with this slide that social assistance for persons with disabilities, including First Nations, the programs in Alberta and Saskatchewan, have increased from 2005 when I first started the database. There's no special magic in it. That was just when we started it. And it's increased by 51.5% since 2005, over that 8-year period, and this is in current dollars. But total income support for persons with disabilities, even including social assistance, over that time period has only increased by 36.5%. So getting into the data, I wanted to try to find out exactly why that has happened. And as I'm going to tell you, that this is largely a phenomena that occurs Ontario West. And when we look for Quebec to the east of Canada, we find that this phenomena has not occurred. And so I'll get into a tiny bit about why that's happened. So this is just one possible direction that you can take with this, this database. And the database is all about the money. It's sort of like that Jerry Maguire movie, Show Me the Money. I have a very difficult time counting the number of people who will actually receive disability benefits, but you can count the money from the administrative data, and that's where I've concentrated, where we've concentrated our efforts. So if you look at Toronto, or Ontario, you find that income support for persons with disabilities, if you compare that to the previous slide, you see that, that it's even more pronounced in the province of Ontario, which has 39.6% of Canada's population. And what you see is that the ODSP program has increased by 70% over that period of time, whereas total income supports for persons with disabilities have increased by less than 40%. For those of you who want to grab your pencils, I'll give you some fast facts. One fact is that in 2005, the total amount of money spent on disability incomes was just over $25 billion. And by 2013, this latest data, you can now win a trivia contest by when somebody says how much is spent on disability incomes in Canada, you can tell them that it's $31.7 billion, so just short of $32 billion. How big is $32 billion? It's about 19% of all the income security that's paid in the country, and it amounts to about 1.6% of GDP. We have a $2 trillion economy, so 32 billion is about 1.6%. These are important fast facts to place in context just how much is spent, and especially when we compare to other countries. So, key features of these 9 systems, when we look at these systems and ask 2 questions. One is employment required for eligibility? Well, it is for CPP, of course. It is for EI, veterans, for workers' compensation, obviously, private workplace plans, working income tax benefit, yes. But when we come to 2 smaller programs, the RDSP and the disability tax credit, there's no employment that's actually required. But for social assistance, this is the key point here. No employment is required. So if fewer people with disabilities are working, then you are going to find a natural sort of hydraulic that sends people to social assistance. Then if we ask another question, and that is permanent monthly benefits provided to age 65, we only have 2 programs that actually do that. The first is the CPP program, CPP disability, that hinges on work, and we also have social assistance that does not. So what we see, if you think of that old shtick that was of asking for volunteers along a line, and then all the other programs step back, you have social assistance as the volunteer to actually perform that function of picking up the slack where other programs have been less involved in terms of paying benefits. So let me say a little bit about the per capita story by program. This is kind of interesting. This is all of income assistance for persons with disabilities per capita in 2005, 2013. And if you're thinking, what is the denominator? The denominator is all the money paid to individuals throughout Canada, divided up by the 10 provinces. And you can see that income assistance for persons with disabilities per capita has been growing most in Ontario, and you can see it's the highest per capita amount. And you can also see that, that the lowest amounts you see from Quebec through to Newfoundland. So you ask the question, why would we start to see income assistance or social assistance be so high, Ontario through to BC, but be in a pronounced way lower in the 5 eastern provinces? Well, if we unpack it a bit and we look at private disability programs, certainly by 2013, you can see that it doesn't tell you the whole story, because Ontario is still the highest in terms of per capita payments of private disability programs, and you can see that BC is also high. But nested within that, you can see that that our prairie provinces are actually showing a lower amount being paid per capita in private disability insurance, and you can see that the Atlantic provinces have quite caught up over that time period. Then we look at workers' compensation, and again, it doesn't really give us a clear picture. What we can see, of course, is in Ontario that workers' compensation per capita has gone down, as it has in Saskatchewan, stayed about the same in Alberta, actually went up in BC. But you see quite a robust per capita picture for Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and Quebec. So workers' compensation gives you a bit of the picture, but again, not a total picture. It's not until we get to EI, and here's the real culprit in all of this, is that the ratio of EI income recipients to employment income earners by province and for Canada, we really have two very different EI programs in Canada. One for the Atlantic provinces and possibly Quebec, and then a very different program for the provinces Ontario and West, where you can see this ratio is much, much higher in the Atlantic provinces. And we know that. We know these programs, that the EI regular program is asymmetric. Then we look at EI payments per capita by province and for Canada, slightly different measure, and you can see once again, Quebec and the Atlantic provinces are very high, and you can see that Ontario West and of course all of Canada shows a much lower figure. And I should also tell you a little factoid, and that is that Ontario westward has 70% of the population of Canada. Quebec eastward has 30% of the population of Canada. So, of course, you're going to see a much more pronounced effect on these figures overall from the 5 western provinces, including Ontario. Then if we look at EI sickness, this was a real surprise for me, because I said, well, why would you have EI sickness per capita again being so pronounced in provinces like Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, less so in Quebec? And again, it comes from the fact that there are different program rules to get into the program. Where I really became surprised after that, with a little bit of surprise from the EI figure, is CPP disability also is showing much higher per capita payments in Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. And then when we look westward from Ontario, and of course Quebec has its own program, you see that this trend that I had started to call welfareization of disability benefits is something that's pronounced in the provinces Ontario and West, and we can see that other programs, other intervening programs in the disability income array are actually doing their job in those eastern provinces. Another surprise is veterans benefits. And once again, we see in PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, you see per capita, which you wouldn't expect to see, is that these programs are providing more benefits per capita in eastern provinces. So, calling that welfareization and the story of social assistance income growth, what I'm going to close with is the fact that I was invited onto a radio show to talk about this welfareization. I tried to promote it a bit and try to gain some interest for it. And when I was you talk to a producer first, usually when you go on a radio show, and they ask you what you're going to talk about, this fellow asked me the reason why social assistance disability income is going up as fast as it is in a way that seems epidemiologically impossible. And I said, well, there's actually 20 good reasons for it. Well, you can imagine the look of horror. If you go on a radio spot, they do not want to hear 20 reasons for something happening. So this is kind of like Murder on the Orient Express, because each and every one of these reasons is responsible for the increases. And that's why when people ask, why is social assistance for persons with disabilities going up the way it is, especially Ontario and westward, you can't just come up to one reason. So here they go in rapid fire. Workforce changes whereby persons with disabilities and others do not have tenured salary and wage jobs that would trigger disability benefits. Undoubtedly true, and it's undoubtedly true in big cities also, where you have more irregular work. Reductions in some of the other 8 disability income systems, leaving social assistance with more to do. Undoubtedly true. Embedded rules that do not support work in older disability income systems, CPPD. You can only make about, what, $6,000 before you become ineligible. So that's true. Changes in medical treatment, and especially advances in medicine and trauma treatment that are keeping people alive, so we have more people with very profound disabilities who are still living. Undoubtedly true again. Aging of the population, that's the one most mentioned. Inclusion of mood disorders and neuroses as disability, especially PTSD, once again, it's also a valid reason. The supposed existence of a disability culture, we were actually absolved of that by the OECD when they did the report on Canada and disability in 2010, but people still mention it. Existence of separate social assistance disability programs and large differences in benefit levels. Well, it's undoubtedly true in Ontario because the ODSP level is about 63% higher than our basic welfare rate, which is not true in other jurisdictions. And I'm fond of saying the reason that our ODSP rate is so low is because the OW rate, the welfare rate, is actually keeping it down. The existence of separate social assistance disability programs, oh, I already said that one. Reductions in OAS and GIS for immigrant seniors, absolutely true. That's keeping more people on disability programs. Post-economic crash unemployment amongst persons with disabilities, again, that's also true. Lack of knowledge about disability income systems other than social assistance, especially among low-income people, once again, undoubtedly true. Post-recession differences in employment patterns and benefits, yes, also true. Differing financial incentives among people to bring them with disabilities back to work and barriers to work in general. There's 14 reasons. Now I'm going to give you 6 quickly. Oh, my time is up. Anyways, really fast. I already said it, huge differences in EI coverage and per capita amounts, social assistance disability programs that are smaller and less generous and less separate and more integrated in eastern provinces, greater portion of persons with disabilities in the mainstream workforces in eastern provinces. That's also true. It's the big cities, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, where you see more precarious employment. And anyways, you'll get the slides afterwards so you can read the other 2 reasons. So thank you very much.